Hi guys, happy summer, happy July. So whether you've started reading Invisible Man yet or not, this video will be useful to you. Um, yeah, so it's kind of an introduction, some overview, some useful things. Okay, so to start with, there are a lot of challenges about the novel. Of course, it makes sense that for AP English, we would pick a challenging book for you to read over the summer. Um, so I want to be explicit about what some of the challenges are and give you some ideas for how to handle it. So the first one, it starts at the end, um, as many novels do, and a lot of movies too. You'll like see a sort of a scene that comes at the end of a journey, and then you'll figure out how the character actor got there. So you could definitely call Ellison's novel a Bildungsroman, a coming-of-age story of the main character, the narrator. Um, the main character, and Ellison is both are utilizing realizations that we won't understand the origins of until the end of the novel. So the things he's talking about, like he mentions characters' names, he mentions, I think, Reinhardt, and he mentions Brother Jack. And we won't know who those people are until we meet them later in the novel. And he knows that. I mean, you don't need to feel frustrated or confused by that. He's writing it expecting us to say, I have no idea who this person is. So we're supposed to be in suspense. We're supposed to only have a part of the picture at the beginning, and that's all right. So let any confusion go. It's the way it's supposed to be. He's never named the narrator, and that can be confusing. He's a man. He's probably in his 20s. At the end, maybe sort of late 20s. He's never named. He's a black man. It's 1930s and 40s America where it takes place. He calls himself an invisible man in the first sentence, so you can think of him as the invisible man. You can think of him as the narrator. Don't let his lack of a name make him feel like more of an elusive or less real, significantly different character than you get in another novel. Like in Great Expectations, his name is Pip. You're like, oh, Pip, that's a cute name. I can picture who he is. Our narrator doesn't have a name, but he's a character like a character in any other novel. Of course, Ellison is doing very specific things with not naming him. But yeah, he means things by it, but he's a character. So there are a bunch of dreamlike sequences, number 3 here. In the first chapter, the music listening session, he's listening to What Did I Do to Become So Black and Blue? And he goes into this sort of dreamlike or literal dreamlike state, or he says he's smoking marijuana, so he's in like a drug-induced dreamlike state. And he sort of goes back in time. That's actually a very useful episode to analyze closely, as much of the novel is. Not that, of course, you can analyze closely all 600 and so pages of it. But the dreamlike sequence of the listening to the song takes him back in time to a slave woman who had children by her white master, and then she's wrestling with whether she hates him or not, and her sons hate him, and he gets caught up in that. So it ties him to it ties his present invisibility and the weirdness of his circumstances living underground in this cave. It gives us it foreshadows for us that he's going to link his realizations and his journey to the journey of African Americans in America over time. It's not just about him; it's about his about the greater journey of Black people, African Americans, former slaves in America. It gives us a preview, a hint at that with the episode. And it's a dream, and of course dreams are weird. So that's an understandably weird part. The chapel church scene when he's at college and listening to the sermon. It's a very long scene, very descriptive. The sermons are sort of weird. That one is also challenging. And the True Blood episode is also dreamlike, very strange. You're meant to understand it as a surreal episode. So don't worry too much about those episodes that are extra challenging. Just get what you can out of them. Good. So, number 4, vague historical references. You can think of the novel as a historical novel. It's thinking about African American activism and radicalism in the middle of the 20th century. And there are links to real and somewhat specific things like African Americans' involvement with the Communist Party, like the Harlem riots in the middle of the century, 30s and 40s. But critical articles that consider the specificity of these historical references determine that they're not very specific. And Ellison said this completely himself, that he's conflating a lot of things. Conflate means to like bring together, sort of merge together. He's not trying to make specific comments too much on specific actions and events. He's trying to use reality of history to make the narrator's story, and its historicalness makes the novel richer and more interesting to us, but it's not super specific. You don't need to look up like a particular event to be able to get something from what he's referencing. It's a sort of generalization with useful reality of how history unfolded for Black people in America in the 20th century. But it's not super specific. All right, the 5th one, which is 2. So, of the many challenging, cryptic, fascinating parts of the novel, his grandfather's riddle and the concept of invisibility are 2 very important ones. The concept of invisibility, of course, is introduced right at the beginning, and his grandfather's riddle is as well. It won't be resolved until the very last part of the book. He's going to specifically reveal some epiphanies that he's come to over the course of his journey at the end regarding both of those. So read the grandfather's riddle a few times. We're going to look at it specifically here. But don't worry about, he doesn't want us to understand it completely at the beginning. It's supposed to marinate in our minds as we're reading about his activities throughout. All right, so opportunities. Ralph Ellison wrote an introduction for our edition of Invisible Man that you are welcome to read. Introductions tend to be a little bit more challenging than novels to read, so you don't have to demand exact understanding from yourself of all of it, but it's a fairly accessible introduction. Here are 2 useful excerpts from it. He starts out with this: what, if anything, is there that a novelist can say about his work that wouldn't be better left to the critics? So you can imagine him saying that sort of tongue-in-cheek. They at least have the advantage of dealing with the words on the page, while for him the task of accounting for the process involved in putting them there is similar to that of commanding a smoky genie to make an orderly retreat, not simply back into the traditional bottle, but into the ribbon and keys of a by now defunct typewriter. So he then goes on to think about all the influences in the journey of how he came to write this exact novel. I know he was writing something else at the time about an African American serving in World War II, and his patrons and helping him write, and his wife supporting him while he writes. He gives us really interesting perspective into what was influencing him in writing the novel. But then there are so many critics, so many, who think about why Ellison's life and why he would have written this and what his influences would have been. So you can imagine him saying that tongue-in-cheek everybody has opinions on why he wrote and what he meant and the significance, but he also, of course, has his own opinions, and those should be valid. And then this next one. So if the ideal of achieving a true political equality eludes us in reality, as it continues to do, there is still available that fiction vision of an ideal democracy in which the actual combines with the ideal and gives us representations of a state of things in which the highly place and the lowly, the black and the white, the northerner and the southerner, the native born and the immigrant, are combined to tell us of transcendent truths and possibilities, such as those discovered when Mark Twain set Huck and Jim afloat on the raft, which suggested to me that a novel could be fashioned as a raft of hope, perception, and entertainment that might help keep us afloat as we tried to negotiate the snags and whirlpools that mark our nation's vacillating course toward and away from the democratic ideal. So early in the novel, the narrator is going to mention that history is a boomerang, so you can picture a boomerang swinging out and swinging back in. This he says in the introduction, and this kind of previews some of the realizations he's going to come to in the very end of the novel regarding invisibility and his perspective on things and his grandfather's riddle. So I think that the novel, and many critics, and you will decide for yourself, think that the novel is ultimately hopeful, even though it's handling a lot of really awful things. One of the probably the most awful of which comes in the beginning, the battle royale in the first chapter. So this is from the prologue, the first chapter, so to speak. So why don't we pause the video now and read this, and then I'll say a few things about it. So this is the narrator thinking about his invisibility. And I think some of the things interesting about it are these sentences here. A matter of the construction of their inner eyes, those eyes with which they look through their physical eyes upon reality. So his invisibility is a product of how other people see him. This is a fascinating concept, kind of complex, but also I think it will mean something to you immediately, the way other people see you, what they see instead of who you really are. And these things, of course, his particular invisibility, of course, relates to being a black man, the time in which he lives, the place in which he lives, but predominantly his race. And there are going to be mostly white, but also black people who see him for something other than what he is, although through the course of the novel he's figuring out who he is. And he says that too in the prologue, and that's really cool. I spent an early part of my life trying to figure out what to believe, and other people were all telling me what to believe, and then I discovered I had to figure it out for myself. Grandfather's riddle. So pause here to read this, and then back again. So it's a riddle. Here's the substance of it. I want you to keep up the good fight. I never told you our life is a war, and I've been a traitor all my born days, a spy in the enemy's country. Overcome 'em with yeses, undermine 'em with grins, agree 'em to death and destruction. Let 'em swallow you till they vomit or bust wide open. Learn it to the young'uns. So he's suggesting a course of action for his grandson that the narrator, the Invisible Man, will spend the entire journey of the novel trying to put more meaning to. And he'll reflect on it explicitly. And finally, you have these notes sent to you in the email too. So here is a list of characters and a list of settings in order of appearance, in order of how the novel progresses. There are some parts that are completely easy to follow. There are some parts that are very challenging. Just stay with it through all of them. Let the more surreal parts go. You don't need to have complete and total and crisp, literal understanding of them. But reference this as the people you should know, the places you should realize you are throughout. And I'll be sending you another video and some more notes in about a week. You can reference them now and then also later if you haven't read yet. Hope you're having a great summer so far.